April 19th, 1995, the United States experienced its deadliest act of domestic terrorism. A massive truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, claiming lives, including 19 students from a nearby school, which was literally right in front of that building, and hundreds of others were injured. This shocked the nation and unveiled a chilling narrative of anti-government extremism. Welcome to Strawberry Ink, where we delve into the stories that have shaped our world. I'm your host, Santiago, and today we explore the harrowing events of April 19th, 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing. This act of domestic terrorism claimed 168 lives and injured over 600 others, marking it one of the deadliest attacks on American soil. The man behind this atrocity was Timothy McVeigh, a decorated Gulf War veteran who turned into a domestic terrorist. His co-conspirators included Terry Nichols, Michael Fortier, and Lori Fortier, as well as an unidentified individual referred to authorities as John Doe No. 2. Timothy James McVeigh was born on April 23, 1968, in Lockport, New York. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1988 and served in the Gulf War, where he was recognized for his marksmanship and discipline. However, his military experience also exposed him to allow the use of force and the complexities of government operations, which began to shape his worldview. Timothy McVeigh enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1988, excelling in infantry training and serving with distinction during the Gulf War. He was awarded the Bronze Star and commendations. However, his experiences in combat, particularly witnessing the aftermath of U.S. military actions, deeply affected him. He expressed remorse over killing Iraqi soldiers who appeared unwilling to fight. These events, coupled with his disillusionment upon returning home, fueled his growing mistrust of the federal government. After his honorable discharge in 1991, McVeigh became increasingly disillusioned with the federal government. He was particularly incensed by the events at Ruby Ridge in 1992 and the Waco Siege in 1993, viewing them as egregious examples of government overreach and tyranny. These incidents fueled his anti-government sentiments and radicalized his beliefs. McVeigh was deeply influenced by the Turner Diaries, a novel that depicts a violent revolution against the federal government, culminated in the destruction of the U.S. government and the extermination of non-white races. This book, often cited as a blueprint for white supremacists and anti-government extremists, provided a narrative that justified violent action against perceived government tyranny. This beautiful book, describes how America is not actually a free country. It's only a free country if you are white and cis. McVeigh's radicalization was further influenced by anti-government literature, notably the Turner Diaries, a novel depicting a violent overthrow of the U.S. government. He was particularly incensed by the federal government's actions during the sieges at Ruby Ridge in 1992 and Waco in 1993, viewing them as tyrannical overreaches. In his mind, the bombing was retaliatory, against what he perceived as government oppression. Choosing the second anniversary of the Waco siege, McVeigh parked a Ryder rental truck loaded with a homemade bomb, a mixture of ammunition, nitrate fertilizer, and fuel oil, in front of the Alfred Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. At 9:02 a.m., the bomb, destroying a significant portion of the building and causing extensive damage to surrounding structures. This was a mass explosion. It was declared the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history, at least at that time. 759 people were injured. All of the hospitals in the surrounding areas, being Edmond, Norman, and Midwest City, had taken them in and treated them. 168 people died from the bombing. One died from fallen debris. All died at the scene. This was a total of 169 deaths. The Oklahoma County Coroner's Office took in all deceased bodies. The Rest Haven Funeral Home in Oklahoma City conducted the mortuary service for those who lost their lives due to the bombing. They conducted celebration of life, and in some services, invited religious speakers to conduct mass. The bodies were buried at the Rest Haven Memory Gardens. Services range from April 23, 1995 to April 30th, 1995. McVeigh's arrest came swiftly. Just 90 minutes after the bombing, he was pulled over by Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger for driving without a license plate. The trooper then realized that the vehicle was not registered. This trooper also discovered McVeigh was illegally carrying a concealed weapon, and that he did not have a permit to do so. Therefore, the trooper arrested him on 4 offenses. Not knowing, he had approached the primary suspect in this bombing. The trooper took him to the Noble County Sheriff's Office headquarters to process him. There, the FBI tied him to the Oklahoma City bombing. Terry Nichols, upon learning he was wanted for questioning, surrendered to authorities 2 days later at the Harrington Police Department station. There, he was officially tied to the bombing and arrested, before being put into the federal prison in El Reno, Oklahoma. Michael Fortier was identified through McVeigh's possessions, his notebook, which contained Michael and his wife Lori's phone numbers. Therefore, they were contacted and cooperated with investigators, ultimately testifying against McVeigh and Nichols. The agents asked to meet him at his home for an interview. Michael allowed them to do so, and he was not arrested. Lori Fortier also cooperated and was not charged. The 3 suspects were tied to a federal criminal probe within the Western District of Oklahoma. John Doe number 2 could not be tied to the probe due to no identity being discovered. He has not been arrested as of May 2025. Timothy McVeigh was initially booked into the Noble County Jail on 4 misdemeanors: illegally transporting a loaded firearm, illegally carrying a concealed weapon, driving without a license plate, and driving without insurance. A day after 1995's 420, happy belated 420 by the way, and happy May, Assistant DA Mark Gibson met with District Judge Danny Allen and dropped the charges due to McVeigh facing more severe charges in federal court. Federal prosecutors Scott Mendeloff and Patrick Ryan presented evidence from the criminal probe against Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. They were then indicted on several federal crimes. McVeigh faced just federal charges, including 8 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and use of a weapon during mass destruction. Terry Nichols was indicted on 9 federal charges, 8 for first-degree murder and 1 for conspiracy, all felonies. Prosecutor Larry Mackey formally charged Michael Fortier with 3 federal felonies, misposition, making a false statement, and conspiracy. Now, as to his wife Lori, she was never arrested and she was not charged with any federal crimes nor state crimes, as she agreed to work with investigators and prosecutors and testify against the co-defendants. She had also been in less trouble compared to the others. Negotiating prosecutor Beth Wilkinson was in charge of her requests for cooperation. Federal Judge Wayne Alley presided over the first appearance of suspects Timothy McVeigh and Michael Fortier. Fortier had been summoned to court. He sent the case of McVeigh and Nichols to the federal court in Denver, Colorado, due to concerns of the trial not having a fair and impartial jury. At this point, the 2 prosecutors who had presented this case to a federal grand jury stepped back and appointed 2 others to prosecute it for them from this point on. Vicky Behena for Timothy McVeigh and Sean Colony for Terry Nichols. Larry Mackey remained the prosecutor of Michael Fortier. The prosecution also announced they would seek the death penalty against McVeigh and Nichols. Therefore, 2 more prosecutors were appointed to the case, Joseph Hartzler and Kathleen Tranner. At this point, both McVeigh and Nichols were being held at the federal prison in El Reno, Oklahoma to await trial. They were moved to the Englewood Federal Prison in Littlewood, Colorado, where Columbine happened, speaking about 420. Oklahoma federal judge Thomas Van Beber arraigned Michael Fortier. He pleaded not guilty to his federal charges. Then in Colorado, federal judge Richard March arraigned Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. They pleaded not guilty to all federal charges. There was then more damning legal events related to the bombing. McVeigh's accomplice, Terry Nichols, was now also tied to a state criminal probe in Oklahoma. Oklahoma County DA Bob Massey initiated this next case. At this point, Nichols had been formally charged with another state felony offense, first-degree arson. He had presented the probe to an Oklahoma County grand jury, the one which indicted him on those severe state offenses. This grand jury went on to indict him on 161 counts of first-degree murder and 1 first-degree conspiracy charge, all state felonies. Massey unsealed this indictment and appointed his assistant DA, Sandra Elliott, to prosecute. Massey sought the death penalty. Therefore, he appointed another prosecutor to the case, another one of his assistant DAs, Lou Keel. Nichols was appointed 2 public defenders to represent him, Brian Hermanson of Ponca City and Creekmore Wallace of Sapulpa. Judge Stephen Taylor ordered that he remain in custody to await trial without bond and set the case over to Pittsburgh County. Before sending Nichols over to the Pittsburgh County, Judge Taylor arraigned him. He pleaded not guilty. Nichols refused to take a plea deal in his case, prompting Judge Taylor to send him to the Pittsburgh County Jail after several hearings had been held to prepare for this trial. He had been attending his hearings on the phone and was then brought back to Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Supreme Court appointed Judge Taylor to preside over the state trial of Nichols due to the complexity of this case. Therefore, Judge Taylor, despite working just in Oklahoma County, had to go along with Nichols and the parties to conduct this trial in the other Pittsburgh County Courthouse. This trial began on March 1st, 2004, and ended on May 26th of that year. The 12-person jury, having 6 alternates behind their back, found Nichols guilty on all charges, 161 counts of murder, 1 of arson, and 1 of conspiracy. The trial then moved to its penalty phase as the prosecution was seeking the death penalty to decide whether Nichols would be executed or not for the murder charges. On June 1st, days after the guilty verdict was reached, the jury recommended a life sentence for Nichols, saving him from the death penalty. At this point, Judge Taylor had refused to toss the death penalty out of the case, nor acquit Nichols, ordering the jury to make every decision as to the verdicts. The case would remain in Pittsburgh County for other proceedings. A month after that last verdict, Judge Taylor refused to have the case be retried and would set sentencing for August 9th, another month later. When that day came, Terry Nichols was sentenced to 163 consecutive prison sentences. Life without the possibility of parole for each murder charge, along with an additional 35 years for conspiracy and 10 years for arson. Therefore, this was a prison sentence of life plus 45 years. After sentencing, Terry Nichols was admitted into the Oklahoma State Prison in McAlester. Terry Nichols appealed his state conviction. On February 13, 2006, the Oklahoma Supreme Court denied him a new trial. Then, on June 7, 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court heard the appeal but rejected it as well. Then, the following year in 2008, the Innocence Project refused to take on the case. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were tried separately at the federal court in Denver, Colorado, for their federal charges. Jury selection for this federal trial of Timothy McVeigh began on March 31st, 1997. It took a while for this jury to be seated. The jury consisted of 12 members and 6 alternates. This trial officially started on April 24, 1997. On June 2, 1997, the jury found Timothy McVeigh guilty on all 11 federal charges. The trial then moved on to its penalty phase to decide whether he would get the death penalty for the 8 murder charges he was convicted of. On June 13, 1997, the jury recommended the death penalty on all 8 murder charges. Judge Richard Masch, a month after that, refused to toss McVeigh's conviction. Then on August 14, 1997, Judge Masch officially imposed those 8 death sentences. The judge vacated the other 3 charges. This judge then rejected further requests to redo the trial, the guilt phase nor penalty phase. He also refused to reconsider the final decision to send him to death row. Therefore, he was afterwards transferred from the Englewood to the federal death row prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. In September 29, 1997, the Denver federal trial of Terry Nichols began with jury selection. A day before that Halloween, the jury was seated. It consisted of 12 members and 6 alternates. This trial officially started on November 3, 1997. On that Christmas Eve, Terry Nichols was found not guilty of murder, but guilty on 8 lesser felonies of involuntary manslaughter and guilty of conspiracy. Therefore, the trial ended early due to the murder acquittal, and there would be no penalty phase for him. Throughout the next months, Judge Matz would refuse to toss the conviction nor redo this trial. Then the judge announced that he would be sentencing him concurrently. Terry Nichols appealed his case. Before receiving his sentence, attorney Michael Tagger announced he would represent Nichols throughout the appellate phase. Michael Fortier had pleaded guilty with a deal to his federal charges in exchange for a shorter sentence with this deal. He agreed to testify against Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh in their federal trials and in Terry Nichols' state trial also. On May 27, 1998, Michael Fortier was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, a sentence for all charges combined together. He was immediately taken into custody after Judge Beber imposed the sentence. He was booked into the Oklahoma's Federal Inmate Transfer Center and then taken to the Fort Worth Federal Inmate Medical Center in Texas. There, he served his sentence and was released on the 4/20 of 2006. After serving less than 11 years, through the Witness Protection Program, he moved to Canada with his wife. Timothy McVeigh faced a total of 10 civil wrongful death lawsuits that had been filed against him on behalf of the deceased victims' families, 2 in Canadian County and 8 in Oklahoma County. The 2 Canadian County lawsuits were dismissed by Judge Edward Cunningham for a lack of evidence weeks after they had been filed. Michael Fortier had been tied to one of those. Judge Anthony Bonner and Natalie Mai transferred 5 of the Oklahoma County lawsuits to federal court. Judge Stella Simpson dismissed one of them for a lack of evidence. The remaining 2 lawsuits were settled, one in court and the other outside of court, for more than $10,000 in damages. Fortier had as well been tied to those last 3, as 5 of the transferred federal court cases. One was dismissed by Judge Bever for a lack of evidence, and 4 were settled outside of court. Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier had as well been tied for those 5 transferred lawsuits. There was also a federal injuries lawsuit filed against Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and Michael Fortier 3 years later. It was as well settled outside of court. Nichols had filed 2 federal complaints and 1 civil complaint regarding his custody condition. The 1 federal complaint was settled and dismissed outside of court. The other federal complaint, Judge Beber imposed an order of more protection to Terry Nichols while incarcerated. The 1 civil complaint was dismissed shortly after its filing due to insufficient evidence. This was done by Judge Anthony Bonner. Kenneth Trentadeu, he died in federal custody in 1995 under suspicious circumstances. His family believed he was mistaken for a bombing suspect and subjected to fatal interrogation tactics. The family believed that he was wrongfully being accused of being that John Doe number 2, the anonymous Oklahoma City bomber who has never been captured. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the federal government, resulting in a $1.1 million judgment for emotional distress. Although the award faced appeals, it was ultimately reinstated in 2008. The Trentadeu family has continued to seek further information through Freedom of Information Act FOIA legation and attempted depositions of Terry Nichols and the others, alleging a broader cover-up. Kenneth, this inmate who died at the Oklahoma Federal Inmate Transfer Center, was claimed by his family and taken to California. His death was ruled a suicide by hanging, according to an autopsy conducted by the facility's faculty. His funeral was held at the Westminster Memorial Mortuary in California. Visitation on September 1st, 1995, and committal on September 2nd, 1995, both private services. He was cremated. In the aftermath of the bombing, anonymous messages were posted on AOL's bulletin boards advertising offensive merchandise related to the tragedy, falsely listing Kenneth Zarin's phone number. Zarin, who had no connection to the posts, received numerous threatening calls and sued AOL for defamation. The court ruled in favor of AOL, establishing a significant precedent for online service providers' immunity from liability for user-generated content under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Department of Justice Inspector Michael Bromrich, the General Investigation, an internal DOJ investigation examined the belated production of documents in the Oklahoma City bombing case, highlighting issues with evidence, handling, and disclosure. There were 13 arguments sent over to the Oklahoma State Appeals Court to decide where Terry Nichols would serve his sentence. All of those disputes were dismissed due to their irrelevance. On June 4th, 1998, Terry Nichols was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for conspiracy and a 48 concurrent sentence for the manslaughter charges combined together. Attorney Stephen Jones represented Timothy McVeigh for his appeal. U.S. Prosecutor Sean Connolly would fight to have him lose the appeals. On the other hand, Prosecutor Larry Mackey would fight to have Terry Nichols lose his appeals. In February 26, 1999, the U.S. Court of Appeals denied Nichols a new trial. Then on July 12th of that year, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his appeal. On October 12th of that year, they denied McVeigh a new trial. Then, on October 1st, 2001, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear McVeigh's appeal. On March 8, 1999, the U.S. Appeals Court denied Timothy McVeigh a penalty phase retrial. Then on May 16, 2001, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear any arguments regarding his death penalty appeal. In late May, no appellate institution, including the Innocence Project, would take on the cases of McVeigh nor Nichols. After all of the trials of Terry Nichols had concluded, he was taken to the ADX Florence Federal Prison in Colorado, the facility with the highest security in America, where he is currently incarcerated. On June 11, 2001, Timothy McVeigh was executed in his Indiana federal prison. His last words were, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." This was from the line of a poem known as Invictus. After being executed, Timothy McVeigh's loved ones got together in 2 different family homes for a reunion to have 2 private committals for him. It was very formal, one in Pendleton, New York, and the other in Lockport, New York, on June 16th and June 17th. The Mattox Ryan Funeral Home picked up his body. and cremated it, only a few miles away from the prison. The ashes were given to his attorney. The Oklahoma City bombing remains a stark reminder of the dangers posed by domestic terrorism, the chaos that a government could provoke, and the importance of vigilance and awareness towards those oppressed. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Strawberry Ink. Stay tuned for more in-depth explorations and pivotal moments in history. Please follow, share the episode, like, subscribe to my channel, and follow me on socials as well. Have a good rest of your day. And I hope to bring you more shows, more episodes throughout this month of May.